I get it, so many gaming rigs look gorgeous in the product photos, promising buttery smooth frame rates and that future-proof aura, yet when you finally pull the plug and fire up the latest title, the experience feels underwhelming. You've probably stared at a bunch of specs sheets, wondered if you're just being cheap, and then hesitated, fearing you'll end up with a machine that sounds impressive but falls short once it's actually in your hands. That hesitation is real, and the risk of buying the wrong thing can set you back a few $1,000s and a lot of frustration. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The Horizon RGB i9 RTX desktop tries to hit that sweet spot between headline-grabbing power and a price tag that doesn't scream high-end workstation only. On paper you get an Intel Core i9 that can turbo up to 5.4 GHz, 32 GB of RAM, a 2 TB storage combo, and an RTX 5070 GPU paired with a 360mm AIO cooler. At first glance that reads like a dream for anyone who wants 1440p or even 4K gaming without compromising on a few extra tabs for streaming, Discord, or a bit of video editing on the side. But what does that actually look like when you're sitting at a desk, swapping between just a quick match and let's crank up the ray tracing in a single session? Let's start with the day-to-day setup. The tower itself is a fairly tall, black chassis with an RGB accent strip that runs along the front. It's not a sleek minimalist box, but it's not overly flashy either, just enough to signal gaming rig without being a neon billboard. The front panel houses a couple of USB-C ports, 2 USB-A 3.2 ports, a headphone jack, and a power button that lights up in sync with the strip. Plugging in peripherals feels straightforward. You don't need any adapters to get a high-speed mouse, a mechanical keyboard, or a VR headset connected. The Wi-Fi module touts 1.2 GB per second speeds, which translates to a stable connection for online multiplayer, even when you're streaming your gameplay to Twitch. In practice, I've never seen a hiccup on a 5 GHz network, which is a relief for anyone who lives in a house with multiple devices fighting for bandwidth. Now, the performance side. The i9's 5.4 GHz boost is impressive, but the real test is how it behaves under sustained load. In a typical 90-minute gaming session of Cyberpunk 2077 at 1440p, the CPU stayed comfortably in the 4.85.0 GHz range, and the RTX 5070 held an average of 84 frames per second with medium-high settings and ray tracing on. That's more than enough for a fluid experience on a 144Hz monitor, and it doesn't feel like you're constantly pushing a button to keep the frame count up. When I dropped the resolution to 4K, the frame rate settled around 5,560 frames per second with a few dips during massive crowd scenes, but it was still playable, especially if you're okay with turning down a few visual effects. For most gamers who aren't chasing a 240Hz ultra-competitive edge, that performance is more than sufficient. One of the hidden trade-offs that often gets glossed over in marketing copy is the cooling solution. The 360mm Alanone liquid cooler looks sleek, and it does a solid job of keeping temperatures in check. CPU temps hovered in the low 70s C under load, and the GPU stayed around 68 C. The fans on the radiator are relatively quiet, but you will notice a faint whine after an hour or two of heavy gaming. It's not a deal breaker, but if you're sensitive to background noise while streaming or doing voice chat, you might want to place the tower a bit farther from your desk. The trade-off here is that you get high sustained performance without the loud fan ramps you'd see on a purely air-cooled high-end box. Storage-wise, the 2 TB configuration typically comes as a 1 TB NVMe SSD paired with a 1 TB HDD. In real use, the SSD handles the OS, game launches, and any quick load moments, meaning you'll be waiting seconds, not minutes, for titles to start. The HDD is a convenient place to dump larger files, recorded streams, video projects, or a library of older games you don't play often. It's a practical mix that avoids the need for an external drive right out of the gate, but it also means you're not getting a pure NVMe-only solution, which could shave a couple of seconds off load times on the biggest titles. If you're the type of gamer who keeps a massive library installed at once, you might consider adding a second SSD later, and the extra SATA ports make that fairly painless. Connectivity is another area where the Horizon shines. Besides the Wi-Fi 6E speed mentioned earlier, there's a 2.5 gigabits Ethernet port, which is a nice touch for those who prefer a wired connection for the lowest latency. The rear panel also offers HDMI 2.1, DisplayPort 1.4, and a handful of USB-C and USB-A ports. I found the HDMI to monitor setup worked flawlessly with my 144Hz TV in the living room, while the DisplayPort fed my primary 27-inch 144Hz monitor. No driver.